Welcome back to the final part of our personal review of birding in Nova Scotia in 2025, starting with October. Autumn is always a good time to see American kestrel, especially at Chebogue, although it is unusual to find a bird that stayed still for any length of time. Perhaps more common were lingering red-breasted nuthatches, yellow-rumped warblers, and hermit thrushes, although many of these birds would soon be heading south. It's always nice to see a ruffed grouse, like this one crossing the road at Ingomar on the 5th of October. This area was to prove to be pretty birdy, with a late-staying blackpoll warbler in non-breeding plumage being a highlight. Golden-crowned kinglets seem to be increasing in numbers in the flocks preparing for migration. Black and white warblers are always a joy to see too, as also are the palm warblers, very active little birds with their ever-bobbing tails. Heading into winter can bring some surprises. A red-headed woodpecker at Roberts Island could be difficult to see at times, but was a splendidly plumaged adult. But the best bird had been found a few days previously at Heartland Point, a sharp-tailed sandpiper that promptly disappeared. Then it was re-found on a small pool on the golf course, and it was time to head up to see this very rare bird. We saw it on the 17th. As we were already halfway there, we went on to Truro to take a look at the American avocet that had been present at the Tidal Bore Centre for quite a while. This was an easy twitch. Just head up Highway 102, pull into the car park and scan the mudflats. The bird seemed perfectly comfortable, despite a number of bald eagles around the area. There was a pair of eagles flying over the mudflats too. On the 24th of October, a trip to Yarmouth went via Camoes Hill, where black-capped chickadee posed nicely and a winter wren was a nice find in the scrub at the side of the road. We were heading to Bunker Island, where a white-eyed vireo had been reported that morning, a bird that can be difficult to find in southwest Nova Scotia but which is most numerous on autumn migration. Alas, we did not see that bird but were delighted to find our own a little later that day at Cranberry Head. There were several individual birds of this species seen on that day, so there had clearly been some arrival. A late-staying greater yellowlegs entertained us at the end of the day at Town Point, near Chebogue. On the 28th, Mark found a short-staying western kingbird at Daniel's Head on Cape Sable Island. Western cattle egrets hadn't been seen so far this year, so when we heard that there was possibly a bird at West Head, on Cape Sable Island, we headed straight out in the late afternoon to take a look. It took a little searching for, but was eventually found wandering the lawns of the houses up on Highway 330, near the West Head turnoff. It had apparently been around the area for some time, but became quite hard to find following our late afternoon sighting. The weather remained quite clement into November, and so the bird life was still plentiful. A brown-headed cowbird joined the more regular northern cardinals and dark-eyed juncos in our Clam Point garden. A trip on the 2nd of November was to Kingsburg, near Lunenburg, where a long-staying ruddy duck was on the pond there with assorted other wildfowl. This is not a species that we see often, down in southwest Nova Scotia, and so it merited a bit of a road trip. Anyway, it was a new sight, and it is always nice to see somewhere new. The bird was present, if distant, out on the lake and mainly sleeping. Still, it is a ruddy duck and doesn't really need much of a view to identify. On the way home, we made a small detour to look for a blue-grey gnatcatcher, newly reported from Moose Harbour. It was a beauty and probably one of the most confiding gnatcatchers we have ever seen. Back in the yard in Clam Point, a rusty blackbird had arrived and was diligently picking up food from the lawn and around the feeders. This bird had immaculate plumage except for an obvious whitish bare patch on the top of its head. We wondered if it had perhaps been attacked by a raptor but managed to escape. We often have sharp-shinned hawks, and occasionally Cooper's hawks hanging around the yard. A morning look around Cape Sable Island on the 3rd of November revealed a palm warbler of the western form at the Guzzle and a lark sparrow in the boat repair yard at West Head. We went back in the afternoon to take another look at the lark sparrow. The light was failing, but the bird behaved well, sitting up on various bits of boat frame so that we could take a good look. We were already out and about, so a side trip to Daniel's Head made sense. It was quiet except for this male-belted kingfisher that was actively fishing in the inlet from a wooden post, always a nice thing to watch. We fancied a trip away from home, and this coincided with a few good birds being seen in the valley and at Truro. We started in Yarmouth, where a western cattle egret had taken up residence in a field bordering Hardscratch Road. It could be difficult to find, but not today, as it posed alongside the cows. Next we headed for Annapolis Royal and the French Basin Trail, to take a look for an Eurasian widgeon that had been found amongst the buffleheads and American widgeon on the pool. It was distant, but a male so easily identified. The real star bird of the afternoon was next on the itinerary. A tropical kingbird, very rare in Nova Scotia, had been present in Wolfville for a while. We hadn't gone previously because we had already seen this species at Chebogue some years ago, but now we were passing, we were definitely up for seeing it. Excellent directions made this a drive up and look bird, much appreciated as it sat at the top of the trees, occasionally flying out for bugs. That had been very enjoyable, and it seemed that we were destined to see every bird that we went for today. Would that luck continue as we made our way to Truro, where a number of rare species awaited, namely 4 barnacle geese, a cackling goose and an American coot. No sign of any rare geese that evening, so we checked into a hotel and were surprised to find snow on the ground on the next morning. We couldn't find the barnacles or the coot, just the cackling goose amongst hundreds of Canada geese near the tidal bore centre. Back home, our almost resident sharp-shinned hawk was keeping vigil near the feeders. A trip to Yarmouth took in a drive down Chebogue Point, where a winter wren was a very welcome sighting. On the 18th of November, a flock of 7 eastern bluebirds alighted briefly in our Clam Point yard. Bluebirds are pretty rare on Cape Sable Island, and it was the first time we had seen any in our yard in the nearly 11 years we had lived here, so we very much enjoyed the sighting. Mark found another white-eyed vireo on Long Point Road on Cape Island. This time the bird was sharing its little patch of bushes with a typically shy yellow-breasted chat. Townsend's warbler has been a bogey bird, or nemesis bird for Mark in Nova Scotia for some time. So when we heard that one had been seen at Green Bay, near Lunenburg on the 22nd of November, we had to go, fully expecting not to see it. It rained. We got soaked. No bird. So we went back the next morning. The weather was better and, after some searching, the nemesis was found. What a lovely little warbler it is. We make no apologies for including a lot of footage of this individual. It is always nice to slay the nemesis, especially when it is such a good-looking one. When we had had our fill of the warbler, we went on to Crescent Beach, which was quiet except for some late-staying shorebirds, such as black-bellied plover and dunlin. We finished the month with some local birding, finding a song sparrow and an orange-crowned warbler at West Bacaro. Orange-crowned warblers are always amongst the last migrants to filter through to southwest Nova Scotia. The last day of November brought a clay-coloured sparrow into the yard at Clam Point. It had been a pretty good month for rare and scarce species. Would December continue the trend? December dawned cool but still fine. The winter gull watching had got off to a good start with black-headed and Bonaparte's gulls at Daniel's Head. But gulls rapidly took a back seat when news broke of a common shelduck. This was a North America tick and so merited a twitch. Unfortunately, it was at Little Dover, near Canso, so it was quite a trek. We decided to make it an overnight stay and got to the site in the late afternoon on the 4th of December. In the failing light, we saw the bird distantly, feeding in a marshy pool. Luckily, common shelduck is one of the most recognizable of birds. That plumage, in big blocks of white and colors, and the red bill, is unmistakable. The Canso area had proved to be very good to us in 2025, although impending snowfall did make us head out pretty quickly after seeing this bird. American coots had proved to be quite scarce this year, and we had dipped the one at Truro, so news of a possible bird at the end of Blanche Peninsula had us in the car and heading out to check out the report. It definitely was a coot. It was feeding in one of the pools and finding just a small unfrozen patch to forage in. And it was in Shelburne County, which was nice and a good pullback after missing the Truro bird. The weather had definitely turned, although we were not expecting the amount of snow we were to see in the new year. The first snows coincided with the arrival of finches from the north. It had been predicted that the birds would head south, not something that happens every year but which is keenly anticipated when it does happen. On the 15th of December it happened, spectacularly, when a large flock of beautiful evening grosbeaks descended on the Clam Point yard feeders. The birds spent much of the day in the yard, feeding on and beneath the feeders and then flying up to perch on posts, the weather vane, and in the apple trees, where they cleaned their beaks and took snow to drink. Our usual garden birds, such as northern cardinals, black-capped chickadees, mourning doves, and dark-eyed juncos rather took a back seat to the grosbeak action. Even the very large flock of American goldfinch that had also arrived were eclipsed, as was a female red-winged blackbird, which is quite scarce in the garden. The sharp-shinned hawk did his best to keep everything on its toes, being the source of regular dreads amongst the feeding birds. Pine warblers are always a late migrant. Long Point Road produced this nice bright individual on the 17th of December. A trip to Yarmouth on the 18th produced unusually good looks at a brown creeper. We were looking for a snowy owl that had been reported at Chebogue Point and were pleased to locate it, hunkered down along a fence line. Snowy owls have become increasingly scarce in southwest Nova Scotia over the last few years, and this very distant view would have to do for this year. A small group of surf scoter allowed close views as they floated near the boat ramp at Lobster Rock Wharf, Yarmouth. We had recently dipped a marbled gardwit at Daniel's Head a few days back. We had stopped to don coats, hats and gloves instead of tearing up the boardwalk to the beach, and had missed it by just a minute. So when news came through that a participant in the Christmas bird count on the 21st of December had relocated the bird at East Ragged Island, we had to go despite the late afternoon. A scramble across rocks and mudflats brought us within view of the bird, sharing the shoreline with black-bellied plovers and a substantial flock of dunlin. A Cooper's hawk was a nice sighting on Roberts Island on the 22nd of December. The next day, a fox sparrow appeared in the Clam Point yard, one of several that would spend their winter with us. Christmas Eve included more winter gulling for Mark. Swim Point on Cape Sable Island is a favourite viewpoint, and provided black-headed gull, Cumlian's Iceland gull, lesser black-backed gull and a fine, close black guillemot in winter plumage. The second big finch invasion was of common redpoles, although they decided to just stick to one patch of alders, down on Bunker Island at Yarmouth. We went on the 28th of December and enjoyed watching the birds feeding on the older catkins. This flock was to remain in the area over the new year, giving local birders a chance of a year bird for 2026 as well. A very long-staying grey catbird was a surprise sighting on Chebogue Point Road on the same day. Still, it did not match the surprise of a female varied thrush turning up at the feeders of Mike and Sandra MacDonald, just up the road from us. This was a nice symmetry, as a varied thrush near Liverpool had been one of the earliest rarities to turn up in 2025. There was no way to approach the bird from outside without spooking it, so photos were taken from indoors and unnecessarily dark. The bird stayed until well into February 2026, giving those who list an almost guaranteed year bird after the new year. And so the year came to a close with a downy woodpecker on the yard feeder and the evening grosbeaks busily feeding. 2025 had produced some excellent birds. It was very difficult to choose favourites, although that Townsend's warbler was hard to beat for the sheer pleasure of nailing the bogey. For rarity value, the black-billed magpie and common shelduck, both coincidentally in almost the same spot, would definitely be up there. Most of all is the pleasure of birding in Nova Scotia, with great birding colleagues. Thanks to all the finders and sharers of the birds, and happy birding in 2026. Mark has been birding a long time, and he has many memories to share. Some of these have been collated into his birding memoirs, available as ebook or paperback, from Amazon. He also writes novels, 19 to date, and all available from the same source. We hope you have enjoyed this meander through the birds and birding in Nova Scotia in 2025. If so, please consider liking and subscribing. There are lots more birding videos, both domestic and foreign, on our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.